You're very welcome. We're doing this for Mad in Ireland. I'm a team member from Mad in Ireland, and my name is Martha Griffin. And I'm going to get Karol and Leona to introduce themselves. And so, Karol, will you go first, please? You're at the top of my screen.
Yeah, sure. I'm Karol McGarvey, and I'm an independent peer support worker based in the community, offering genuine peer support to people in a private setting. And genuine in terms of I like to use all of the values, principles, and practices of and ethics of peer support working in mental health in my practice. I'm also registered with the International Association of Peer Supporters, and it's great to have that backing as well.
Great, thanks, Karol. Leona.
Thanks, Martha, and lovely to be here and chat to yourself and Karol. Similarly, my background is in peer support. I run an organisation that I founded called the Haven Hub charity. It's a mental health and peer support charity in the prevention of suicide, and to help people that are struggling with peer support volunteers. So I also run a trauma group. I'm a sexual assault survivor from my childhood, and I went through the process of bringing that person through the courts and the criminal process. And after that, I set up a peer support group for people that, similar to myself, have experienced trauma that still interferes with their life. So I run both, and I develop and support groups as the community requires them, really. And that was something that kind of really was needed in the community at the time. And I also run different courses through the Haven Hub for people to do with wellness. So things like wellness recovery action planning, decider skills, and things like that in the earlier stages of sometimes when people start to decline in their mental health. So yeah, very passionate about mental health, very passionate about recovery, and lovely to be here.
Great. And I suppose we all came together. I kind of had been having different conversations with the two of you at different stages around sexual violence and peer support. And, I have my own strong feelings on that as well, I suppose. So do we need to start with, I suppose, talking about sexual violence, what we mean by it, and who we might meet and who we might work with that would fall under that category, or whoever wants to jump in first? Or
I think I found suppose a definition of sexual violence. So yeah, the definition behind it would be any sexual act or attempt to obtain a sexual act by violence or coercion. Also an act to traffic a person, or an act to directed against a person's sexuality, regardless of the relationship to the victim. So that covers a lot, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the context. And I suppose we meet people who have had backgrounds and that experience, and we work with them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I like that it includes the act of persuasion, because sometimes it may not even go further than the persuasion piece. And the person is very affected by that. Or if they've given into persuasion, they don't see it as violent. And people around them might not, because like that, the question comes up around the communication and the lack of communication around it. And for those people to understand that, coercion, again, is just because somebody isn't forcefully, physically making you do something against your will, whether it's pestering or whether it's, taking advantage when somebody is drunk, or various different ways. There's loads of ways, actually, somebody can be violated sexually. That isn't always necessarily just held down and forcefully in any way. So it's important that those people understand that violation is just as relevant and needs just as much attention and healing as any other.
That's very interesting because, sometimes when I talk to people and they talk about, but, it wasn't, a dark park at night, or, it was only, and they'll say it'll only this or that. And I suppose the feelings that comes up for them, they're kind of worried, are they justified because of, and obviously, of course they are. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, it's great to hear, that as well, because one of, in thinking about the definition myself, like sexual abuse or violence without giving consent, and it's great to hear, Leona and Martha, that aspect of what is and what isn't consent being made clear here.
Yeah. And it's, I suppose, like, it's not just gender specific either. It's women, it's men. Are you working with people who, from a peer support perspective, who will be coming with these issues? Yeah.
Yeah, for me, that's what our support group is all about. It's all about identifying it, and the first step in the support group that we're on, they're similar enough in ways to the traditional steps, but definitely amended according to the needs of survivors with a more humanistic version. But the first step is recognizing that we were powerless over the abuse and it's not our fault. And that's a step that for many, they need to do a lot more than once. So you don't just do that step and say, that's that done. No more self-blame. We're very good actually at finding ways in which we can attribute blame, or even just questioning and challenging ourselves on what we could have done differently. And that's just counterproductive to our recovery. We really need to recognize and discredit the part of ourselves that really is so eager to blame ourselves. And sometimes we get that mixed up with personal, I suppose, personal responsibility for our wellness, where we're encouraged to find the parts that we can change and the parts that we would do differently. But when it comes, I think, to sexual violence and abuse, we need to be very careful of that line, because the shackles of shame and blame are, they need to be firmly put on the person who was willing and capable and did make those acts against somebody else, and not the actual victim themselves. But our tricky mind sets in, and our tricky mind finds ways of saying what we could do differently, and even understanding, I think, that process, that the part of our mind that might want to do that isn't always a bad part. It's a protective part. It's like, okay, if I understand what I did here, then maybe I can prevent it happening again, and so it might initially start and feel like, I want to understand this. I want to know what I can do differently. But the damage it does in kind of blaming ourselves, and in creating that self-hatred, and in owning something that really isn't ours, is so counterproductive to our own recovery, that we really need to acknowledge and hear that voice when we do start that blaming process. And I think that's where, for me, definitely the power of groups can come in, because I can very easily identify when somebody else is self-blaming and blaming themselves. And it makes perfect sense to me why that's not appropriate. And it's like, but that's not your fault. Whether that's that they had too much to drink, whether that's that they were nice to the person beforehand, whether that's that they chose not to fight back in the middle of things, whether it's that, they had feelings. So sometimes people, obviously, especially if it's a relative, they might have some feelings of love at the same time as feeling scared of the person, and that's confusing. But whatever it is that they find that blame for, I can very easily, I suppose, acknowledge and see it when it's not me, and somebody else can when it's me, and that is the part, and that's where the power is, in being able to actually say, okay, well, hang on, if it's so obvious that it wasn't her fault, why am I so quick to accept it was mine? And that's where I think the power of peer support can help, with the right boundaries, so that we're not there triggering each other as we go,
Wow, there's loads there, Leona. And I suppose what comes to mind is, this is a tough subject, and you look really comfortable talking about it. You've obviously had the experience of supporting others through, and you've used your own lived experience in that. So I suppose, that's peer support at its essence. How is that different than if people kind of didn't go to a peer support group, or what's different that people will get from peer support in this?
It's, I suppose, like peer support can work in so many different ways, whether it's with addiction, whether it's with mental health, it's so many different ways. And it's the idea of belonging, really, idea of fitting in, idea of other people genuinely getting it. And therapy, it can have a huge, massive effect on our healing and play a huge important part. If I'd relied solely on peer support, I don't think I would have been fully well, because there's elements of my recovery that I desperately needed that expert opinion on, and the expert advice and expert approaches on. And it's just, sometimes you need both. I needed a sense of belonging. I needed that sense of, where it's not that somebody else is the expert and I'm the victim. I needed the sense of equality. I needed the sense of someone making me feel, not necessarily in their words, but knowing that they've been through something similar, that actually this is nothing too personal to me. These are really good people and this happened to them too. And if that's the case, then maybe I'm still a really good person and it happened to me too. And less personal around my own situation. Sometimes our systems don't allow for that. Sometimes our systems give us messages that it is to do with us, whether it's through a court case or whether it's through other ways of healing. For me, I did go through that court process. I'd be seen as one of the lucky ones. I got a verdict. I got a long sentence against my abuser. However, it came at a huge cost. So during that, I did have to face some of the criticisms and the parts of myself that blamed me, where I remember this long-standing barrister would have questioned and said, we're not going to see here where, this is a violent attack. This is not a violent attack. They shouldn't always say no, right? But I was a child, and every time another person in any way has sex with the child, that child says no. So, and any time that somebody has sex with any child, it's violent. So, sometimes actually the system will feed into the part of us that will find a way to really blame ourselves. And we need to be around other people that actually that really get it, that really get why children do what they're told, and that really get the part of you that feels as if you're attracting the evil of the world, when in fact it's actually nothing to do with you yourself. It's to do with the perpetrator, who they are as people, and what they're capable and willing to do from the damaged places that they come from. And an expert can sometimes give you that. They can explain it in words, but they can't say, look, this happened to me too.
Yeah.
That's my opinion anyway, but I'd love to see what Karol thinks as well on that.
Yeah, I think, like, again, like for me, like it's trying to see things from a non kind of theoretical point of view as well at times, thinking about the practicalities of what hurts us, what we're having to deal with, and what kind of support have we got in our daily lives. Like I do, as an independent peer support worker, I do work one-to-one with people who would have experiences of sexual violence, and I find I can relate in a way as well from my own experiences. Again, I was quite fortunate. It was in my teenage years, and I was fortunate that it wasn't too severe, the act that was committed on me. But it was by surprise. I suppose there was underage drinking. My drink was spiked, and one thing leads to another. But I was just very fortunate that I was able to, just by pure chance of being violently ill, being able to make my way out of that situation. But yeah, there was an act committed against on me as well. But in comparison to the people I support, it's not. In my case, it wasn't. It was kind of mild, But thing is, like, I guess when I'm supporting people, having some kind of relationship does make it a wee bit easier for me to be just to be still, and just to create space for them to just say what's troubling them. And the experiences that I have is people with historic experiences of sexual violence and abuse. And it could be the anniversary of someone passing away, not well, someone that just may have recently passed away, that kind of a perpetrator, or not getting, especially if it's someone that's in the extended family type situation as well, not getting the closure they have the opportunity to, and it's just being there to comfort that person would be my kind of role during those times, because with the people that come to me for support, like many of us, there's various kind of lived experiences of adversities of different types. But I guess, like in this country, and even in thinking about Donegal, even my geographic as well, I mean, so many people have experienced some form of sexual violence in their life. And as peer support workers, we're going to be always coming into contact with people. But I suppose for me, it is about creating space to just to hear someone out, just a gentle kind of space to be with them. But it's also as well, like, perhaps linking people up with some of or signposting people to information and resources, and especially if there are rights-based issues in relation to that, where people can kind of go for additional support, and
but you will hold a space for people who are coming, and you will use your lived experience in a peer support way to support them.
Yeah. So, so like if that means linking in with other professionals and that, that the space creates, the conversational space for people to think for themselves in terms of what they think they might need and would like to explore or try out,
There's a field of thought out there that, as peer support workers, we shouldn't work with people who've experienced sexual violence, that we might get triggered, that we couldn't cope. I suppose, is there any response to that kind of thinking, or what do you do to support yourself in the work? Or
yeah, I understand the concern around it. I really do. I had similar concerns, and I do think that sometimes if a group of survivors, say, come together, without the right supports, without the right boundaries, without the kind of right group rules such to keep that group safe, then it can actually cause a little bit of damage and trigger people in ways that maybe the group aren't able to ground that person afterwards, and they might leave feeling more vulnerable. So I actually really get the concern. But survivors are going to seek each other out. They really are. And they're going to find each other and find ways of talking to each other. Whether we want to call that peer support or not, it is. Let's create a safe way of doing that, because it can be so helpful. I don't know. And like my trauma support group that we run, that's the one place I can be very real with everybody. That is a huge support to me. I run it, but I look forward to running it. I look forward to being able to be very real. Those people really get me. And we need rules. So we do have rules. So we don't talk about any graphic memories. There's certain things that we encourage each other to keep for one-to-one counselling with the trained psychotherapist or psychologist. And we're kind of very definite around that rule, just to keep the group safe, not to silence anybody. And we say that every time we speak about it. We say, God, this is not any efforts to silence, because a lot of us have been silenced for far too long. But it is in an effort to recognize the damage that we can cause unintentionally if we don't have those rules. So I think more effort needs to go into actually not being so afraid of what's needed in order to create a safe space, and what's needed, and the ability to kind of, as peer support workers, to know our own limits. So while I am very, very happy in that group to give group support, I'm personally less able to do that on a one-to-one basis right now. So I'm very kind of, I suppose, like that. I have the skills now to know my own limits. So that's my space, that hour and a half that's there. That's my space where anything to do with that trauma, anything to do with how it still affects me, anything to do with the annoyance that that it even still affects me, all of that that comes up during my week, that's my space for it. But I'm not going to really make too much space outside of that, because it's interfered with my life enough. And so I create that space every single week, and I honor that it has a genuine effect in my life. And I allow myself that space, but it allows me to put boundaries around, well, actually, I deserve a life, actually, that's on that kind of, that doesn't get to just fall in anywhere, you know. And because of that, I have boundaries around, well, that's, you know, I don't do one-to-one support then outside of that. So I think once we know ourselves really well and we become a good expert on ourselves, we can create a really good space. It's living proof. The girls, the guys that are going to that support group, I've seen it work. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen people that haven't left their room for years because the trauma is affecting their life so much, of the sexual violence they went through. And they're out and they're going to bingo now, and they're going to, you know, they're minding their grandkids, and they're doing various different things. They're getting their life back. You know, they're laughing, they're going to comedies. They're not in that survivor mode anymore. And some of them have tried counselling for many years, and no doubt it did help. But one thing that they have done as of recently is they've joined this group of people that make them feel like they belong. You know, and things like, you know, the fact that our families, a lot of the time, things that we all have in common. So many of us, you know, our families of origin, especially if the trauma happened as children, just took a toll. Nobody's majorly at fault. Nobody is kind of very definitely in the wrong. It's not black and white. But a lot of the times, you know, family can't be there in the way that a lot of families are. And there's just these broken relationships. And we need new ones. We need new ones, and safe ones, and real ones, and genuine ones. You know, so to me, I do think actually we need to relook at that. I don't think it's as simple as peer support doesn't work. I think you know, it's living proof to me that it works extremely well. But we do need to make sure that there are some protections in place, and that it is a safe group. And we have a laugh. It's not all about this is what happened to me and describing the minutes. That wouldn't be good for anybody. So I think the perception of what might happen during peer support for somebody in trauma might be, okay, well, do you sit and listen to the detail of what happened to them? Actually, we don't. We don't do that at all. You know, we talk about our relationships. We talk about, well, what do I struggle with? I struggle with trust. I struggle with when my child is the same age as I was. Things that aren't actually, you know, very specific around what actually happened to me. And that can be because of loads of things, you know. So that could be because of, you know, for those of us that might have experienced alcoholism in the home, you know, very similar things. It's the effect it has on us. So yeah, I do think that actually we're wrong in thinking that it's too big of a subject. And I think if we don't cater for peer support, I wanted it when I was going through that court process. I wanted someone who'd gone through it too. I didn't want the guard. I didn't want my counsellor. I wanted someone who had gone through it, that could turn around to me and say, yeah, the DPP, you know, that process there it's going to take about 12 months. You need to find a way to put it away and take it back out when they need you to. And it's going to really frustrate you. And you need to really mind yourself for that year. And, you know, for the times when I was expected to get the train up and down every single day, for someone to say, God, that was exhausting. You know, insist that they allow you to stay in Dublin for that, because that'll exhaust you. The practical things that the guards and the experts aren't going to know. I needed that. I looked for it. I couldn't find it. All because of this fear that if we put people who have experienced the same things together, they won't know their limits. Give us a little bit of credit. We've survived a lot. So give us a bit of credit that actually we'll find a way of doing this in a healthy way as well. And that would be my kind of response on that.
And what you're sharing there is kind of, it sounds like it's very trauma aware, I suppose, because we're so aware. And I know John Reid does kind of research around, you know, people's experience of trauma, and then coincidentally they have mental health issues and the impact on. And I loved what you were talking about. It's the practical impact of that trauma on your daily life. And it's a non-medicalizing it, I suppose. Yeah. Karol, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, like for me, like even like with sexual violence was an early adversity for me, and then later on in life, additional different forms of adversities came along that would result in the ultimate breakdown of my own kind of health eventually. And with that came many years of recovery, a good 7 or 8 years. But again, I would have engaged with all kinds of services, different services, and they were all very, very good in the experiences that I've had. I was quite fortunate that way. But I also found that my participation in peer programs and that had the biggest impact on my recovery and my understanding of what was happening to me, of what I was thinking about, and my understanding. And not only that, but facilitated really me becoming a part of community again, the wider community outside the mental health bubble. But I participated in research recently, undergraduate research as a research subject. And there were many subjects, between peer support workers, a few psychotherapists, and a clinical psychologist, and then services that provide support to people throughout the country, including support to those who have experienced sexual violence. And I was quite alarmed by some of the things that presented in the research findings from from the research participants or the subjects of the research. And it was really around, again, what was touched on with your question, Martha, around fears about peer support. Excuse me, peer support workers working with victims, survivors of sexual violence and abuse. I don't know if this will help.
I'm just wondering, is there a bodily response to
not protecting the voice enough, and I think that's the issue here. Oh goodness. But yeah, there were many kind of concerns that were expressed, but a lot of them were personal opinions from some professionals, and again, that concern about risks around peer support workers. What are they sharing? The risks of what are they sharing about their own stories? The risks of them being peer support workers being traumatized and reactivated, and all these things, as if peer support workers are people in engaging with the mental health services that are just picked up and dropped into peer roles. Unfortunately, I had to go through a massive journey to go to even get to the point where I would begin professional training for the peer support worker role, and then the practice, and then the deepening of practice after that through continued professional development and supervision, participating in supervision for peer support work as well. So I found a lot of the things that came up in the research, no fault of the researcher, but things that were coming from those who were subjects of the research. And it really highlighted both, some of the major structural and attitudinal barriers that exist in this country at this time. I know that the mental health services throughout the country are getting to know more and more about recovery orientated practice and peer support workers and that, which is great, but it's, there are some attitudinal barriers there, but particularly in this research, it was around peer support workers working with victims of sexual violence, and not having adequate training, and in some cases there was mention of not even having adequate trauma training, trauma support training, which in my experience and with the education and training I received, I found it adequate. I mean, one of the key things about being a peer support worker is that you are getting the professional training to be able to work within a system, and also to be able to access your lived experiences, if need be, to contribute something to an interaction with someone that you're supporting, if they require that in the moment, in that interaction. Oh gosh, I'm going to lose my train of thought now. Excuse me. I was just saying, what was I just saying? Sorry.
You were just
No,
saying
you're
around.
making very relevant points, Karol. Yeah, you're just saying like that is a lot of it is about personal opinions, really, when you looked at some of the feedback on it, and
Yeah.
why, and from that place of fear,
And,
Yeah.
and there is a lot of training there, and it's just, when we think about the services that exist for supporting people with sexual violence, so, a lot of those are grassroots services. So I think the Rape Crisis Centre, when they were originally set up, it's led by women, and it started from that point of view. Also, that research also showed that there aren't a lot of modules being offered on sexual violence in third level education, and some institutes or some courses might touch on that. So really, all mental health workers, if they're going to be working with people with sexual violence experiences, there should be, there should be some training there, perhaps, or also there's the and also we must remember that if there are specific programs, I'm sure you can speak volumes about this, Leona, that offer support to such as your service. That is an environment where any discipline in the mental health services, when they go in, it's about in that environment learning and growth and development. I find that a lot of the work that needs to be done in the mental health system mirrors a lot of the work that a person has to do for themselves in recovery. Systems have to do the same. It's all about growth, learning and development. So I just wanted, I was quite alarmed by some of the attitudes that were, there around peer support workers, not being adequately trained. If this is something to do with, how many, the qualification itself, a level 8 qualification, if it's not a full, all the modules of a full degree program that other disciplines might have, we must remember the value of, that expertise by experience, and how some people have spent years going from the things that really changed and transformed their lives for the worse, and having to be on that threshold of moving from that identity into a new identity of moving forward. The value in that, will easily knock out whatever number of modules missing to make up a degree qualification, and really the key about a peer support worker that I found through my continued professional development, research and development, sorry, I'm going a bit fast here, is, it's learning how to act, how to be a person, how to access the knowledge that you have through your lived experiences of this world. And a mentor of mine once said that knowledge is great, but it's not everything when it comes to peer support. Being with people, companionship through the tough times is really, really powerful, and it really is about being human and trying to get to the things that are really fundamental and basic as well. So I don't know if that answers the question there.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And I suppose if anyone's listening then and they're kind of saying, well, Fiona and Karol are running their own places and they're doing peer support, and what safeguards have we got in place, for reporting, or for, what's the process? Is there supervision, or,
Yeah, there's a lot of group kind of agreements, a lot of limits to confidentiality, the same as in a lot of the professions, the same as if I go and I deliver a RAP program. The same, I suppose, limits to confidentiality in so many other areas. It's actually easier. It's easier to say it in those groups, and it's easier for them to understand. So for example,
you will break confidentiality if you give me an example, Fiona,
I have to break confidentiality, not if somebody discloses their abuse.
Yeah.
Because somebody even coming to my trauma program, if that was the case, would, it's more or less telling you. So I'm just very straight up. So anybody that's new, we go over the group agreement, and we do it regularly as well. So I'm very specific around it. So I can hear that somebody was abused and not have to report that. But if they tell me who that person is, if they tell me the identity of that perpetrator, that changes it for me. So if it hasn't been reported already, and if it's disclosed who that person was, that's withholding of information of a serious crime, then that changes it for me. Then I have to disclose it. So for that reason, even if it's as simple as my brother, it doesn't even need to be a name, I have to disclose it. So they need to be very careful around the identity of the person who caused this abuse. That's actually easier in an environment like a trauma support group, because we're already going in there, and we're already, whereas when that same limit to confidentiality exists if somebody just comes in off the street and we know nothing about their history and needs a little bit of support from the Haven Hub, where it's not a group setting specifically for trauma. It also exists if I'm delivering a course, so whether it's mental health first aid, whether it's RAP. It's just when you say that in environments actually where people aren't necessarily thinking about sexual violence, it nearly feels like that shock system. But we're very definite around the disclosure issues. We don't, we live within the rules that are there. They're there for a reason. The same with like that, if there's any indication that, there's a child being harmed or could be harmed or around that person, straight away, we recognize the need to disclose until such time as that changes, or if it changes. I suppose for me, what's really important here is the need to stop tabooing subject around sexual violence. And what my worry would be is if we say peer support is an effective and an efficient, I suppose, response and support to people who are struggling. But if they are a survivor of sexual violence, you can't do it with that. That's putting that taboo right back there. It's making us feel as though actually everybody else is okay, but that one horrible part of ourselves that we've hidden from society and that we haven't told for so long, if we tell that untellable thing to somebody, we become the exception. We become the, oh, you deserve help and we want you to get help, but not here, and let's stop doing that. We actually need to work to stop doing that. It's 1 in 4, in fact, it could be more than 1 in 4. We need, like, what's a peer support worker to do? They can hear all about maybe possibly some issues around addiction, self-harm. They can hear about their difficult childhood. But then when they say actually anything at all that hints towards sexual violence, to turn around and say, well, actually, I'm not the right person for you. What's that going to do for survivors if they've built a relationship with that person? It's going to tell us to shut up about that. Don't mention that. That's the untellable, and it's the opposite we need to go with here, so stop making sexual violence the exception, and recognize that actually survivors and peer support workers, we do a very valuable job, that we can actually say things and challenge people in ways that experts won't get away with. So I'll be very quick to turn around to a psychologist and say, but you don't understand, but you haven't been through it. And so, it's easy for you to say that. Yeah. Whereas I tell you, when I'm in my trauma group and when someone else is saying, I wonder, Leona, if you're deflecting that anger, I wonder if that's fair on that person. I wonder if, you're cutting that person off because you're in that protective place that makes you feel as though, you're going to get rejected anyway. I won't rubbish their opinion. And if they're able to turn around and say, I used to do that too, and various things, I can't rubbish it as easily and say, but you don't know what it's like, you know. So there's a huge value in that. We challenge each other a lot. We don't just sit in our victimhood and say, God, this is comfortable. We say, God, we deserve to get out of here, and let's help each other out. And sometimes we can get away with saying things to each other in a very empathetic, sympathetic way, with full of compassion, that if an expert said to us, we take exception to. So let's value that, and let's work with that, and let's put the safeguards and, you know, the need for to make sure that we're definite about the disclosures, the need for boundaries around what exactly we're sharing. Let's put all of that in place. Let's value the input from other people that have experienced other similar things, and that have managed to in some way find their way out of that dark place.
Right. Yeah, Karol.
Leona, I just loved as well, just there when you were talking about that power balanced aspect of peer support, where, you know, in comparison to any other discipline, we can negotiate the power between peers, can negotiate that between and both, so that supporting peer and the supported peer both have the responsibility to manage, to look after the relationship, you know, which is really, really nice, you know. And then there's that also, I loved hearing it as well, Leona, is like, and I'm sorry if I'm touching on this, but like I see what I do as being a complementary service. So that means being with someone no matter where they're at in their journey. And I think maybe, like, I agree with you, Leona, all services should view themselves in that way, that they can be complementary, that they don't have to, you know, sorry, another service or whatnot, because that is key. Because with the complementary aspect of peer support is, you know, it works very well on its own without other services. It works well with services, complementary, and it also works really well when people are waiting on waiting lists and go and have access to peer support. I mean, that's really, really important, you know. But yeah, like for me, like I suppose with the one-to-ones, like I haven't got the numbers up here yet. My practice is well enough known yet to do group work. Like I started group work last year, no, 2 years ago, but it was getting the numbers and the attendance was difficult, you know, and it was virtual. So, but you know, so like, yeah, like I can really get the challenges with confidentiality and what does get discussed or in group. Like I suppose in my one-to-ones, it's, you know, there's not, you know, it is a space for any level of discussion, I suppose, without, you know, from a non-expert kind of point of view, but the complementary, I mean, sorry, in terms of confidentiality, I always make the limitations known to people and occasionally remind them of them as well, you know, in relation to say self-injury. Sorry, when we think of the typical kind of confidentiality, it's around harm to self or others, kind of as a limit. And then, of course, you know, the Children First Act, where the reporting requirements there and related around any form of abuse to children or children at risk. So yeah, it's just making that known at the beginning of a peer relationship, and then occasionally throughout, I'll just remind, just so that people are kind of aware of, you know, the limitations of the space. But yeah, I rely on supervision as well. You know, if there's anything that supervision with someone who is really experienced in peer support working or other mental health professionals that have a good understanding of peer support work and perhaps recovery orientated practices and how that can work with you know, the medical model if it's within the mental health system, you know. But that is a space for anything that I'm unsure about. You know, I always Jack, and I always keep people that I'm supported with informed if something needed to be discussed, let them know about that as well, or if something needs to be reported. Like one of the things that I'm really happy about in my practice is around self-injury, and like I've got the assist. I did the assist training recently, which has recently been reformatted, I think a couple of years ago as well. It's very, very I was really impressed. It's very human, kind of focused, person-centered, so I found that really useful in my practice in terms of around self-injury or etc. To be able to to be able to take a discussion all the way, and to be able to have these, be able to see if someone really is a risk to themselves, which is great, and it also makes discussions around self-injury as well a safe place for me to go as well, without being worried about about even talking about it at all. So I suppose I can't remember what I was going to say there, but I was going to make a point. But
it's important to have the words and to name it, and not to be thinking or presuming or kind of pondering. I wonder, they say, to be able to come out with it, and like you were saying, Leona, to come out and talk about sexual violence and name it and bring it out into the light, it is so important. And I suppose in peer support working, we're also we're modeling kind of how we are dealing with things and how we live, and our lived experience, our living experience is happening. So it's good from that point of view as well. And I like my understanding of this area broadened. We had a conversation before we were doing this podcast, and I've had a few conversations with people since, and it's it's a different way of talking with people than you would get if it was a counselling, and I'm not saying anything against counselling, but there's a different language, there's a different, I sometimes feel that if somebody has that lived experience, they're not trying to rescue somebody. They're there for somebody, and it's not sympathy, or it's not, oh God, love you. I remember seeing, Leona, when your case was in the paper, and I was just like, the bravery, and Colin O'Gorman talking on stage, and to me, he had dealt with it, and he was able to talk out about it. There was a bit of a liberation in that as well, of talking, and other people bringing that piece that they've had the lived experience with too.
I think it's really a way actually as well of attacking the very foundation of sexual violence. Sexual violence depends on a number of things, and it depends on us being uncomfortable to talk about it, whether it's that we're kids when it happened, or various things. So we keep it to ourselves, and that violence is how it reoccurs. The perpetrators of sexual violence are really dependent on that silence, and by us actually saying no. I mean, when I was a kid and even growing up, right up till I was 28, it was very much, God, I just couldn't have said it out loud. And I'm the type now, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way you'll recover from it. But now I'm like, I shout it from the bloody rooftops if I want to. I'm not going to make myself feel that sense of shame. I held it. I was as sick as my secrets when I held it. And I love the way Karol says there, it's a complementary, peer support can be complementary, because one of the steps that we have in there around it is that we tell the untellable to someone. And the strange thing is, very few times is that telling the untellable to someone within the group. So a lot of the time that will be a case of actually, whether it's to a helpline, or whether it's to a helpline like the Rape Crisis Centre. Or a lot of the time we'll really encourage each other to go and do that counselling piece, because of the very, very definite need. I definitely had to have a safe place to process the memories in which I was running from. that safe place in which I had to actually go back, relive it, and go through the detail of that. That wasn't in group, that wasn't with another survivor. That was it with very much with an expert, very much with somebody who was able to that had a lot of training and being able to ground me around it, to sit with me without being triggered, and things like that. And we encourage each other to go and do that piece with somebody who's an expert on that piece. And I don't know if I would be recovered if I didn't do that. So I think it does need to be seen to be complementary with other necessary parts. And like within our group, we tell each other that we don't hide from it and say, we don't need the experts. Now I'll be honest, there's some people there and say, no, I've done that counseling, not doing that again now. And we challenge that thinking, where it's like, okay, well, what approach, I wonder, did that counsellor have? And are we aware of how many different approaches there are when it comes to counselling? And are we aware that when we're in a different place in our lives, counselling actually might work really, really well? So we can encourage the person to rethink and rewire our minds into what we're willing to accept help with this area that we've learned to be very quiet about, in a way that's very helpful. So it's in no way to replicate or to replace any sort of professional help that might be needed on that journey. But sometimes actually people need to be able to say it in a safe place and a non-judgmental place. And not everyone is willing to just go straight to counselling for that. They're afraid of the power these memories come with. When I would remember some of these memories, I would wet myself. I would really lose myself. I would get very scared. It was a very distressing time. And it takes a lot of guts actually to bring yourself to the place where you're saying, I'm going to sit in a very controlled, very safe environment and go through the detail that makes my body react in that way. And I needed support to do it. And I think having people around me that was saying, Leona, you don't deserve to live a life where you don't know when that's going to happen to you. You deserve to recover from that. And you can, because that used to happen to me. And it doesn't anymore because I went and I did that piece of work with counselling. And I needed to have those very conversations. I don't know if I would have been able to get through it without it. And I really appreciate the bravery you talk about. The bravery to me, and the time I needed to be the most brave was when I was on the floor. No one knew, and there was no cameras, and there was no one asking me my opinion on things. And when I needed to step back up off that floor and try and function again, they were the hardest moments. And everyone in that trauma group can really identify that place. Even those who didn't get trauma have that big T, as we call it. But it's the feelings. Part of us that get dismissive. So I get dismissive, and I heard Karol, and I don't know if dismissive if it's right or not. So apologies if that it caused any offense. But I get dismissive of my pain by saying, well, at least it wasn't a relative for me. God, that must be awful when it's a relative. Other people get dismissive and they say, but that happened to Leona over 60 times. It only happened to me once. Other people will get dismissive of their own pain by saying, well, mine wasn't too severe. Thankfully, I got there just in time before it happened to this degree. And we all get very dismissive, trying to say our pain actually could have been so much worse. And yeah, that's true to a level, but actually acknowledging and validating, damn, that affected me huge, in different ways. There's no measure, and recognizing when each other does that and saying, your pain was valid. Your pain had a huge effect on you. You don't need to downplay that, and you don't need to turn around and say, but I know I could have had it worse, because your pain was as valid as mine. And we can do that in a group setting, in a peer support setting, where an expert won't be allowed to, even if they can identify a part of themselves that actually felt that way. They're not allowed to. The boundaries around them bringing their own stuff into it isn't allowed when it's psychotherapy, So yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Leona, because I did notice that, Karol, when you said it as well. And there is a hierarchy of, I see it in mental health all of the time. I didn't have that bad. I wasn't treated that badly. If I have, and we have privilege, we do have privilege, but we also have pain, I suppose. And I was just thinking, Leona, you were saying, the counselling was the space that held that for you. But I think in the future, and I think it is happening actually in your organizations, and I know it's happening with other peer support workers, they're holding the space to work through that really dark mucky stuff that has to kind of come out. And I think peer support can hold that as well. Yeah, definitely. We haven't even touched on society, mental health systems, social or justice systems, just your barrister, I presume it was a barrister for the defence, Leona, like even that line of questioning in relation to a child, I think it's inappropriate, from because a child is under 18 in the eyes of the law.
The thing is, believe it or not, it was my own, and he was a brilliant barrister. And he said it to me. He said he prepared me because he said, "Look, I am going to take the power that the others will use, and I'm going to bring it there first for the jury." So he sat there and he said, and I get what he was doing because he knew the defense would. So he knew the defense would bring this up, the fact that I didn't say no every time, the fact that I went and I met this person when I was a child, the fact that it wasn't violent and I didn't have the bruises and the marks and I wasn't beaten up. The first 2 times was very violent, actually. After that, I just did what I was told. But yeah, no, it was him that said it, and he said it because the defense would have if he hadn't. But I had to do what he didn't realize is that I had to do so much bloody work to tell myself that every time I didn't actually say no, every time I didn't try and fight back, that they were just, in fact, they were worse because I gave myself more of a hard time for it. They were just as valid of those times, and they were just as painful, and they were just as disgusting and terrible as the times when I did actually fight back. And the amount of work I had to do that was really kind of challenged by this long-standing educated barrister that was there able to say in an open court that any child, a rape of any child, isn't violent, is just horrendous. So we do need to actually work. And I went to the bar and I spoke openly to a lot of the barristers. And like, you know what, I was very grateful of the barrister I had. But I said, we really need to look at the ethics. We can give somebody a really effective defense, but we can be moral and we can be ethical and turn around in any open court and saying any sentence where sex, it's never sex firstly, but where rape on a child can in any way be non-violent is just simply untrue. And so we need to get our words right. Child pornography, there is no such thing as child pornography, because pornography is an act that that adults can make a decision on, but children don't, so that's child abuse. We need to get it right. We need to call it out for what it is. And we need to stop actually being okay with somebody else just because they stand there and they're very educated getting it wrong. We need to be able to say it. Actually, you got that very wrong. I found I couldn't say it at the time for myself, but when somebody, talked about a thong for somebody else's thing, God, that jumped out at me, and I was able to find my voice around that and how wrong that was. So, things like that. We are, as a society, we need to kind of like that, stop thinking we discredit it. And like that, I know that obviously there's women that are perpetrators as well, but a lot of the time people equate it with men. We discredit our men when we think that a simple thing like a tongue can make them into a rapist, So we're actually doing all society a disfavor, we're being unfair on everybody by assuming actually that people can be affected and turned into rapists because of the decisions and of victims, So we really need to kind of relook at that, and that's where I find society has a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I suppose, and I don't know whether you'll find that, Leona, that people are braver and come to you because your story's out, your lived experiences out there. Do people seek you out from different parts of the country, or?
Yeah, I find it hard because I have to be very careful around it. Like, I did 87 interventions the first year I opened up the Haven Hub myself. I was very strict around making sure all the volunteers got counselling if they had interventions. I got none. Because I thought, okay, well, no, I know this stuff and I know this stuff.
Yeah.
I had to do no interventions at all the following year because I burnt myself out. I'm back now and I'm doing it to a certain level, more groups than one-to-one. But because I have to be careful that the world is a beautiful place and that I allow myself enough, I suppose, enough conversations and stuff around the stuff that actually is a really good is the good parts of society, and the parts that aren't so dark and evil. So I need to do a lot of work to balance that out, because people do I think they're so brave in actually contacting me. But now I have a better system where I like that it will be very much a referral basis, where rather than me motivating them to reach out for help, I straight away put them in contact with somebody else in the Haven Hub. So that if it is a personal contact, that I'm only ever kind of given that when I'm on shift, but that I'm not ignoring it, and I would never ignore anybody. I validate that I see their pain. I validate that it's great that they reached out, but I don't take it personally, because if I do that, I'm not always the right person actually that they need to speak to, especially if I'm having an off day myself. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is vicarious trauma and taking on, people's pain, and we do have to be mindful of that. And if we live in and work from a lived experience perspective. So we're coming up, I think we might have actually passed the hour. So just, I wanted final words, I suppose, from anybody or.
Well, for me, just thank you for opening the conversation, for not running away from it, for being willing to say, here, let's talk about this. And we need more conversations like this. And just to that part that I said about giving survivors and peer support workers a little bit of credit here. They've obviously gotten through and overcome huge adversity. Give us a bit of credit that we will honor the need for safeguards, the need for boundaries and things, and actually work with us for that, rather than be so definite that we won't recognize the need for it. And like that, to value the input that sometimes actually peer support and lived experience can give, more so with the right boundaries in place, more so than expert opinion, and right alongside expert opinion and expert support. So yeah, just the need for that, and to me, trauma is very much peer support is very needed when it comes to trauma. Group support is needed. That's how we find our way out. Don't take it away from us,
We'll fight you for Karol.
I would just like to thank you for having me as well. And yeah, like I feel that peer support workers, like someone who experiences an adversity, no matter what that is, has the capacity to offer someone support, whether they become support workers or not. They have that experience to be able to support someone else in their community. And yeah, I had a really big point to make, and I'm probably going to lose it if I'm not careful. But the other point I wanted to make was that oh goodness, I did a point to make, and I mean, I suppose maybe I'll get it at the end of this section. Well, I suppose like there is a lot of evidence out there for peer support working. And, even the World Health Organization is very supportive of the peer support movement and professionalized peer support work. And they've produced two wonderful documents, one for working one-to-one in peer support work, and the other one for working in peer support groups. And the peer support group one's quite interesting in the sense that it does state that people need not necessarily be trained facilitators to work a group, because history shows us, our society shows us that people do come together. I think Leona's mentioned it, Martha, you probably mentioned that earlier as well. But I mean, there are two great documents. There's a lot of material out there, but there's also the Doors to Wellbeing peer support or peer specialist webinar series, which is every last Tuesday of the month, 7 p.m. There's an hour, and they cover incredibly diverse topics that are delivered by peer workers in the mental health system services in America, and provide cutting edge kind of things that work around difficult topics in relation to support and system and regulations and justice, etc. But also there's the International Association of Peer Supporters, where qualified peer support workers can register for membership, and they have an excellent document which is available on their website, which is the National Practice Guidelines for Peer Support Workers and Supervisors. That document has gone through 3 iterations, and it provides guidance, the principles, values, and ethics of the peer support working, but it's got 2 sides to each one as well, and quite detailed. One side is for the peer support worker, and the other side is for the supervisor, so that they can be aware of how the values, ethics, and principles can be applied in practice within the mental. This was developed for the mental health services as well. And I think it's an excellent document. And then we have the Wildflower Alliance as well, who have got some guiding principles on their website. It's a wonderful document which really captures the spirit and the heart of peer work when working with people, when supporting people. Some key things and that are fundamental to providing effective peer support as well. And then there's the Mad in Ireland website for documents, for news and articles and etc. to keep informed. But also I see that the Mad in America as well, with peer support search, there's massive amounts of discussions and happening there, and things that are being brought up. For example, some research that is being produced around peer support working in mental health, compares apples to oranges, which leads to interpretations for findings that are not realistic at all, on the basis of what has been compared and not compared, and the requirement for researchers to be knowledgeable about peer support, the movement, the informal peer support, and the formal peer support practices as well. And I think there may have been one other link, but I'm sure we'll be posting these on the website along with but it's a pity. I forgot. I had a really great point to make, but
you covered lots there. That's
you
brilliant.
did. And we can include any other links that you had, Karol, at the bottom of the article. I suppose what we're going to do now is if it's up at this stage, we will have looked at it, we will have okayed it, and we will put it up. So thank you so much, Leona and Karol. I'm going to stop the recording now.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.